Hello, and welcome back to the Librarian of the Rings. Today we're going to be talking about what the dwarves might be like in Magic the Gathering's The Hobbit set, and specifically what Thorin and Company might be like. Welcome back, my name is Ben, I'm the Librarian. Now I've been doing a lot of speculation about what Magic the Gathering's The Hobbit set might look like on my shorts, but I know that not all of you watch that, so I wanted to produce this supercut that would talk about all of the dwarves in Thorin's Company. So I have 13 dwarves, and then I have one card that is Thorin and Company. So I'm going to play for you all of those. They're each less than a minute long, and they talk about what I think the dwarves might be like. But before I do that, I want to talk about the dwarves generally and how I've kind of developed with them over time. Now I set out to make dwarves red and green because that is what they were in the Lord of the Rings set. Now there weren't a whole lot of dwarves and they all fell into the red and green categories. Now we're going to get a whole lot more dwarves. There's going to be a lot more opportunity for that, and so I really don't know if they will all be red and green. You know, I've done a video before about how magic the dwarves in The Hobbit are. There's a lot of kind of things around them that are magic. Things like their doors, and they cast spells, and they place curses, and things like that. And so that really might lend itself better to blue than to green, but there certainly is probably still a green aspect to them. So I wonder if the dwarves will end up being red, blue, and green, depending on how it goes. Now, these cards that I'm talking about today primarily focus on them earlier on in the journey. I think there may be later cards for them, but this kind of focuses on them during the journey. And specifically, I gave them all adventures. And the reason for giving them all adventures is because adventure is such an important word and theme in The Hobbit. You know, it's used in The Hobbit almost 50 times, adventure or adventures. And it really is kind of that starting off point where Gandalf is looking for someone to share in an adventure, and Bilbo often reflects on how adventures are. And so all of these dwarves are adventurous. Now I didn't give them all that creature types. Some of them got very specific and special creature types, but if I didn't have something else to give them, I gave them adventurer as their creature type, and I gave them an adventure to go on. And so that allows them to be cast as instants or sorceries and into exile, and then come out of exile. Now why is that important? Well, besides the word adventure being important, the fact that the dwarves are in exile is important, right? The dwarves are not in their home. That's where they're trying to go. Now, Peter Jackson's movies really pulled on this theme of home, maybe even more than the book does, but this idea that they are reclaiming their home is really important. So having them go into exile and then come out of exile, I thought dovetailed really well with the ideas in the book, and is a way to show that in Magic the Gathering. Okay, now I did make a few errors in terms of spelling and wording, and also, you know, just different magic mechanics. I'm still getting used to making magic cards, but I think the themes and the ideas are strong in these cards, and I would love to see at least those come really out in the Magic the Gathering set. Now I'm going to play all of this for you, but I want you to drop in the comments and let me know what you've thought. I've really appreciated everybody who has dropped in the comments on the shorts and told me a little bit more about what they think, or places where I have made errors. I'm not always perfect at getting things correct on the color pie and things like that, but I would love to hear from you what you think the dwarves are going to be like in the Magic the Gathering set. So this would be called Thorin and Company, and it would represent Thorin and all of the dwarves. The important number there is 13. So we would come in with a mana cost of 11 red and green, a total mana cost of 13. And of course, a creature this big would only be useful if it has trample. And we see that kind of trample effect when they come out of the gate in the Battle of Five Armies. So I don't think it's too big of a stretch to put that on there. We would like to reduce that cost though. So this does have, this creature costs one less for each dwarf you control. So you could reduce the cost all the way down to a red and a green, but it would be really overpowered to allow that to just stand like that. So what could we do to kind of reduce that? Well, they need Bilbo in order to be effective, right? So we have, unless you have a rogue in play, this creature can't attack or block, making this creature not all that useful until you have a rogue in play, that lucky 14th member. And then of course the dwarves are all about treasure, so we need a treasure play here. So we have, whenever this creature destroys another creature, create a treasure token. So that's what I think might happen with Thorin and Company in Magic the Gathering's The Hobbit. This card would be called Bombur Last in Line because Bombur's always kind of bringing up the rear, and this specifically is referencing when he falls into the Enchanted River as he's being the last one to cross it in Mirkwood. So this would be an adventure card. I do expect adventure to be an important mechanic in The Hobbit. If it's not, I feel like that would be a missed opportunity since there's so much emphasis on adventure. So for his adventure, it would cost 1 and a green. It would create 2 food tokens, and it would be called Dream Sleep because he falls asleep, dreams of food. Now this is going to be really important once he actually comes out into play. When you play him, it's going to cost 2 and a green, but you're going to get a 5/6 for that. So that seems really cheap. So you got to balance that cost out. And we want to do this in a flavorful way. So Bombur, when he falls in the stream, has to be carried around by the other dwarves. And we want to show that impact. So if you don't control food, Bombur has -5/-5, reducing him to be a 0/1, virtually useless. And all other dwarves have -1/-1. This really incentivizes you to keep some food in play, which is what Bombur wants. Now, Balin is one of the most fleshed out of the dwarves in The Hobbit, so we know the most about him, and one of his key characteristics is that he is their lookout man. He's always on watch. And so this is Balin, lookout man. He would be red, and he would also be able to go on an adventure. I think that there should be a card for each of the dwarves allowing them to go on an adventure. I think that'd be really good flavor. So his adventure would be spot something. So he's on the lookout, he spots something. 1 and a red in order to scry 2 and draw a card. That might be too cheap for that. It's kind of a powerful mechanic, but you could cast this as an instant, and I think that shows Balin really being on watch. He can act at any time. Now, when you cast him as a creature, he's going to cost 2 and a red. You're going to get a 2/2 creature for that. But the really important thing is, of course, going to be his effect on the other dwarves. Other dwarves you control have Ward 1 and haste. Because he's the lookout man, he serves as a means of protection for them and also allowing them to act faster. So if you could get Balin out, Ward 1 and haste, you're playing a dwarf deck, that could be really, really powerful. Let's talk about what Thorin might look like as Thorin and Company leader. This would be Thorin very early on in the journey, red and green, because those are the dwarf colors. He would be classified as a legendary creature, a dwarf noble. I want to have an adventure card for each of the dwarves. That adds a lot of flavor. So he's going to have an adventure, it's going to be sorcery, and it's called Hire a Burglar. 2 and a red, sacrifice an artifact, then search your library for a rogue card and put it into your hand. It is a tutor for a rogue, so you could get Bilbo out this way. You have to sacrifice an artifact because there has to be some kind of payment, and it would be fun if the contract itself was an artifact. You could sacrifice that and get Bilbo. As himself, he's going to cost 3, a red and a green, so he's fairly expensive, but he has a pretty powerful ability. Sing together. Tap any number of dwarves you control, draw that many cards. Card draw, one of the most important things in Magic the Gathering. Thorin is described as the most important dwarf, so having him do something that is super important, very valuable here. And it brings in that singing flavor as well, that's so important to the dwarves. We have Dwalin, Unexpected Guest. Now, Dwalin has 2 primary features that I want to capture in this card. 1, he arrives first at the unexpected party, and 2, he's the one that lends Bilbo his cloak and hood. We're trying to do one of each dwarf with an adventure. His is called Lended Cloak. Search your library for an equipment card with mana value 3 or less and attach it to target creature you control. It's a little equipment fetch and attach so that Bilbo can get that right away. And I anticipate there being a lot of equipment in this set because the equipment in The Hobbit is really important. Now, capturing him arriving first, when you cast him as himself, he has flash, so he is unexpected. He comes out of nowhere. And then it says, if you cast Dwalin in any phase other than your main phase, other dwarf cards in your hand get flash until end of turn. So he arrives first, but if you do that, the other dwarfs also get flash because they're also unexpected. So I think that's a nice way to really capture the things that Dwalin does in the book in a Magic the Gathering card. Kili, Hasty Scout. And this is Kili as he is scouting ahead to look for a cave for them to be dry in the Misty Mountains. We're trying to do a card of each dwarf with an adventure to really show that they're going out on an adventure. Here, Kili has Find a Cave. And this is going to be an instant because you need to be able to cast it at a point where things are dangerous. Dwarves and halflings you control gain protection from everything until end of turn. Each opponent creates a 1/1 red goblin creature token. So of course, Kili and Fili find this cave, which they think is safe, but it's not. So they do get protection from the giants. So if you are facing something really dominating, you can cast this to give protection to your dwarves and halflings, but you are going to create a goblin problem down the road. Now, if you cast Kili as himself, he gets this. As long as you control a creature named Fili, Kili gets +1/+0 and has haste. So Kili and Fili are going to work together, and really they are being hasty by going into the cave before they've thoroughly explored it. So we're trying to capture that haste here. So now let's look at Fili. Now Fili, of course, is Kili's brother, and they're going to work together. But first we want to talk about the adventure that he has. So all of these dwarf cards are going to have an adventure to really show that they're out adventuring. That's at least what I think should happen. And this one is called See Across. So one of Fili's main roles is being able to get the boat when they are in Mirkwood, because he can see the farthest because he's the youngest. That's why we're calling this Fili the youngest. And when you do See Across, this is going to be a scry mechanic. So you cast this as a sorcery, and you scry 1 for each dwarf you control. The more dwarves you have, the more you're going to be able to scry, the further you're going to be able to see. Now, when you cast Fili as himself, that's when he's going to pair up with Kili really well. So he has, as long as you control a creature named Kili, Fili, and it looks like it misspelled it there because of autocorrect, gets +0/+1 and has reach. So Fili is throwing basically this hook across the river in order to snag the boat. So we're going to give him reach so long as you have Kili out as well. Dori Friendly Porter. He is a dwarf mount. Dori's main role in the story is actually carrying Bilbo around. But first, we need to talk about his adventure. His adventure is called Lose a Friend because he is going to drop Bilbo, which will lead to the Riddles in the Dark sequence. So this will cost 1 green, and it says return target creature you control to its owner's hand. And it's an instant, so you can use it as a protection thing. What happens because of Dori losing Bilbo is that things actually turn out better because Bilbo finds the ring. So you can use this as an instant, you can protect somebody, but then when you cast Dori as himself, you're going to get whenever Dori attacks while saddled, other dwarves you control gain first strike until end of turn. Dori's role is carrying Bilbo so that the other dwarves can do what they need to do. It also has, if Dori would die while saddled, return him to his owner's hand. So you aren't going to get super penalized for sending Dori out there because he is doing it to be a good fellow, and so even if he would die, he's just going to come back to your hand. Nori, Hungry Companion. That's what I would call this card because, you know, as you go down the line of dwarves, there are some of them that just don't have much personality at all, and really the only thing we get on Nori is that he shares Bilbo's view on regular meals. So that's what we're going to have his adventure be called as well, regular meals. Sometimes you're really kind of reaching to pull something out of this because the dwarves themselves don't always have a lot of personality. So with Nori, we have this adventure. It's a sorcery, and it says create a food token for each dwarf you control. His defining characteristic is meals. We're going to create some meals here. Now, when you cast him as himself, going to say, as long as you control a creature called Ori, Nori has +1/+1. Ori and Nori, they go together. They don't have much else to do, so they are able to plus each other, basically. Now, I did make a mistake when I created this card, and I made the cost too high. It should be 1 and a green. I would not make this a 2 and a green card. So now let's talk about Ori. Ori doesn't have a lot of defining characteristics at all, but what I've drawn out here is that he arrives in the middle of a pack of dwarves during the unexpected party, and so his adventure is going to be called Arrive Together. And it says search your library for a card called Dori, Nori, Oin, or Gloin and put it into your hand because all 5 of these dwarves, they arrive together. So we're going to use Ori as a tutor to pull one of those dwarves out, and then that's going to help out later because of this idea of coming together. When you cast him as himself, if you cast Ori from exile, which would be if he'd been on an adventure, you may put another dwarf from your hand onto the battlefield. And then as long as you control a creature called Nori, Ori has +1/+1. So those two will buff each other. Now, Oin is one of those that doesn't have a lot going on in the story. He has almost no mention, so we're digging a little deep here. He's going to be red because the main thing that he does is lights fires, and so he is going to have an adventure that is a sorcery called Light a Fire. Now, the main purpose of lighting the fire is to help strengthen the dwarves, right? And so that's exactly what this is going to do. When you cast it as sorcery, dwarves you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So fairly simple there. When you cast him as himself, he, like many of the dwarves, is going to benefit from his relative dwarf. So as long as you control a creature named Gloin, Oin has +1/+1. So this is a pretty simple card. Oin doesn't have a ton going on, but we're just trying to capture that feeling of making the fire and strengthening the other dwarves here, and then being there with his brother Gloin in order to be able to go out and fight together. Gloin. He's more filled out than some of the other dwarves, and particularly because he plays a role in the Lord of the Rings, we know more about him. He has this really cutting remark about Bilbo where he says he's more of a grocer than a burglar. And so the adventure here is going to be an instant, and it's going to be called more of a grocer. Basically, it's going to cut down another creature. Target creature becomes a 1/1 green halfling citizen and loses all other abilities. So I think that works pretty well with this idea, but what actually happens is Bilbo overhears that and he gets invigorated by it to do something that he wouldn't normally do. So we've got to capture that as well. So it says, if Gloin enters from exile, halflings you control get +1/+1 until end of turn and gain haste. I worded that a little incorrectly. It should say get +1/+1 and haste until end of turn. So if he comes after having made that comment, then the halflings are going to get that boost and become hasty. Now that's a little bit dicey because haste is more of a red mechanic and we're making him green and we're using this replacement effect. So it might be better for him to be red-green, but I think the flavor of the card is good. Now, Bifur is kind of one of those characters who doesn't have a lot, but we did need some bigger, more strong dwarves in the company, and so I chose Bifur to be one of those because Bifur is specifically called out as having fought like mad against the trolls, and we're going to use that term for his sorcery as well. So it's going to be fight like mad, cost 1 and a green, and it says target dwarf you control gains +3/+3 until end of turn and fights target creature you don't control. Okay, so you're able to get a little spot removal out of this, and then when you cast him, it says if Bifur enters from exile, dwarves you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So he's a 3/3, but he also gives other dwarves +1/+1 until end of turn when he comes in, so long as he's already gone on his adventure. And that's what I think Bifur might be like in Magic the Gathering. This last one is Bofur, and technically Bombur is last, and I already talked about Bombur, who is called last in line, but this is Bofur, and Bofur, again, another dwarf. There isn't a lot about him, but one thing that we do know is what he wanted from Bilbo when he came to the unexpected party, and that was minced pies and cheese. So I've made an adventure here called Minced Pies, and it's going to create 2 food tokens. Now, food tokens were also important in the Bombur card, so these would play really well together, which is important. And then Bofur has Devour. Now, there was a Hobbit with Devour in the Lord of the Rings Commander set, so I think Devour would be a fun mechanic here. He has Devour Food 2. He can come in with 2 +1/+1 counters for each food you sacrifice when you play him, which will give you the option of making a fairly large and robust creature here if you have the correct foods to do so. And that's my idea for Bofur in Magic the Gathering: The Hobbit set.